Hi, I'm Morten Solvik, Vice President of Mahler Foundation and host, writer, and producer of the Mahler Hour, where we bring you the personalities, places, and projects happening right now in the Mahler community around the world. Last month, we explored performing Mahler on historical instruments. I was joined by Philipp from Steinecker, who took us on a detailed journey into the sounds and characteristics of the instruments in the orchestra that Mahler employed for his symphonies. The differences in tone and playing styles was clearly evident in a preview we heard of an upcoming release of Mahler's Ninth Symphony that Steinecker has recorded with the Originalklang project of the Mahler Academy Orchestra. Remember, you can see this show and all past Mahler hours on our website and on our YouTube channel. For this episode of the Mahler Hour, I'm delighted to be launching a new series of programs co-hosted by Thomas Hampson that will be dedicated to Mahler's life in song. These shows will explore the ins and outs of these central works in Mahler's oeuvre. We'll look at the circumstances surrounding their composition, the literary sources behind them, the relationship to Mahler's symphonic output, important musical details, even manuscripts and performance considerations. Before we get to the details, let me remind everyone attending live to post any questions you might have to the comments section. We will get to these at the end of our show. Don't forget to include your name and the country you are writing from. Also, the Mahler Hour is brought to you by Mahler Foundation. So if you want to support our activities, please become a member. Just go to our website at mahlerfoundation.org for all of the details. Today's program will take a careful look at the early songs up to and hopefully including the songs of a wayfarer, the Lieder eines fahrenden Gesellen as well, hopefully. Joining me for this episode and for all the installments of Mahler's Life in Song is my co-host for the series, Thomas Hampson. Welcome, Thomas.
Oh, thank you. Great to see everybody, or to know that you're there. And yes, do please write in questions as we're talking. That'd be great.
We are going to be looking at some of the most important works that Mahler wrote. I mean, we think of him often as a symphonist, but of course, his song output was not only persistent, but also extremely important to his creative outlet. What is so special about Mahler's relationship to song? What are some of the aspects we need to be thinking about as we go through this series?
Well, I think that I think it's incredibly important to understand his relationship to song and specifically to poetry. I think that Mahler drew so much inspiration not just from the world around him, but the world inside of him. He was certainly one of the most well-read composers in history. His devotion to German literature was enormous. His inspiration from some of the greatest writers, certainly without question Goethe, but all through the Romantics as well as the second generation of Romantics, which we'll get to, was enormous. And I think that I think there's, even though I do want to, when we get into the Knaben Wunderhorn, I want to push back a little bit that these songs were simply laboratories for orchestral works, but you cannot deny that his working out of emotion, of human context and behavior, even just innate expression of a human being, was found in his, especially in his early songs, that then blossomed into a larger orchestral musical context and by definition perhaps a more metaphysical context. So I think understanding the songs is fundamental to understanding Mahler. And he wrote them his whole life. He was very busy in the early life. I mean, when we get to Das Lied von der Erde, obviously, what are we going to call it? The Song Symphony, I guess. So I mean, what is song? It's word as a metaphor of thought, inspiring music as a metaphor of feeling. Boom.
Yeah. And of course, his relationship to word shows up in the symphonies in Urlicht and Das himmlische Leben, symphonic movements, entire works, as you say, in Das Lied von der Erde, and in all of these influences and quotations that sneak into his symphonies. But as you rightly point out, that's just a fraction of what's going on. Mahler's world is also captured by songs that never make it into the symphonies. That's not the point. It's not really what he's trying to achieve. He's creating his own world, and it says a little bit about his interior monologue, as you say, about what life means and how we can express that. We'll talk about those characters. Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
No, I was going to say, we're going to today be really focusing mostly on a young Gustav Mahler. And the young Gustav Mahler, who was quite frankly challenged in his studies whether to focus on literature or on music, I think we see a perfect example of the turn of the century student, music student. We see enormous influence of Schubert, devotion to things Schubert, devotion to things Schumann as well. So I think there's a lot of musical experimentation going on. Can I do that too? Can I write a song that sounds like X, Y? And I think we're going to get into some wonderful examples of that.
There's also, of course, the aspect of Mahler's, I wouldn't say literary ambitions, but certainly his talent and interest of writing his own poetry and looking at even the prospect of writing an opera libretto. So the literary side of Mahler is not merely, not merely just observing; it's really creating in a very active way. And we'll get to that certainly with Lieder fahrenden Gesellen and even before. But before we do that, we decided we're going to take a sort of a bird's eye view of his song output, because I think it's very confusing if we jump into the early songs and don't talk about the entire context. So we have a few slides here to just show you roughly the output of Mahler in this genre and what songs followed which songs. Maybe we can.
Yeah, I think the chronological blocks are very good for a reference point. We Mahlerians tend to get a kind of a big picture of the Mahler, but when you actually break it down, like here, the early single songs, 18 to 1883, we're talking about 20 to 23-year-old Gustav Mahler, and it's indicative in these songs, if you know them and you're hearing these melodies in your mind, Erinnerung or Hans und Grete, that even that early, the germs of his musical thought show up in those songs specifically, and certainly the first symphony, maybe in the fifth symphony. Fahrenden Gesellen comes as a piano version, as it were, and we'll get into the little bit of the weeds on that today. Probably have to finish that off a little bit. It's the actual genealogy of the various versions of Fahrenden Gesellen are somewhat difficult to get to. And then we start this amazing relationship to the Des Knaben Wunderhorn, the youth's magic horn, which starts earlier than we tend to think of it. We tend to think of it as orchestral songs in 1892 and then moving forward and ending with 1900. But the Knaben Wunderhorn source of poetry was quite early.
Yeah. Well, we see aspects of that in Lieder eines fahrenden Gesellen. Wenn mein Schatz does clearly seem to have a precedent in Des Knaben Wunderhorn. At a time when Mahler hasn't even sort of told his biographers that this is a source for him. So you're right. It's already haunting his musical and literary imagination quite early. So let's start with the early songs. And before we get into any of the things you just saw listed, it's important to point out that Mahler, certainly as a student at the conservatory, was active completing his assignments. And those assignments would invariably have included writing songs as well. And we find two examples of manuscripts that are fragments in Mahler's Nachlass that were abandoned or completed in another form elsewhere. I just want to show you one of these manuscripts. This is Es fiel ein Reif. This is a Heine setting. Probably written in 1876, his first year at conservatory. As I said, these exercises were quite common for composition students at the time. I think we have a close-up of just the beginning of this manuscript as well, just to give you a sense of 16-year-old Mahler playing with the notion of song very early. And as I said, this is in all likelihood an assignment at the conservatory. You see he begins the song in pencil, somewhat hesitantly, and only in the second line does he reach for his ink. And in a very characteristic sloppy manner, there's ink spots all over this thing, and the other manuscript is even worse. In fact, he had to abandon the other manuscript because it was just such a huge splotch at the middle of it that it was unusable. Characteristic for Mahler. And we know that from Natalie Bauer-Lechner that Mahler was, one of his pieces was rejected because the parts were wrong, the writing was so sloppy, and he had made mistakes in copying these things out. So this is just a fascinating example of one of those consistent aspects of history, and it's our lack of complete knowledge of it.
Morten, can you scroll down to the next strophe, the next bit? want to
I
show.
don't think we can scroll down, but we can go back.
Then go back at in the ensuing phrase. Look at this. It starts on a low C and right ba dee da dee. It goes all the way up to high F.
That's right.
The range of his songs are crazy. I mean, we sing that with one of the early songs where it's ba ba da dee ba da dee da da. These are very difficult songs to sing, very very rangy, as it were. I'm always asked, what does it take to sing Mahler songs? I said, well, yeah, voice would help.
Quite a range.
Really.
There's a fascinating exercise there, and I've this summer, if you want to hear these fragments, you can come to the Steinbach Mahler Festival. They'll be performed, even though they're only about 20 measures each. It's a fascinating glimpse of Mahler's sonic world at the time, very clearly aspiring to a Wagnerian approach. Almost every measure entailing some sort of transition to a new key. Anyway, this is just a very small and slight lesson in history, and that is, of course, of all that is missing. Let's start with what we do have. Let's continue with that. And the first three songs that came out in terms of the chronology of his production were Im Lenz, Winterlied, and Mai Tanz im Grünen. And let's listen to Im Mai Tanz im Grünen just to kick things off here with the early songs.
Wer fröhlich ist, der schwinge sich ein. Wer Sorgen hat, der lass sie daheim. Wer ein liebes Liebchen küsst, wie glücklich der ist. Ei Hänsel, du hast ja keins, so suche dir eins, ein schönes Liebchen, das ist was Feins. Juchhi, juchhi. Ringel, ringel, ei Gretel, was stehst du denn so? Guckst doch hinüber zum Hänselein. Und ist doch der Mai so grün und die Lüftelein ziehen, ei, seht doch den dummen Hans, wie rennet zum Tanz. Suchte ein Liebchen, juchhe, fand's, juchhe, juchhe, juchhe. Ringel, ringel, rein, ringel, rein, ringel, rein.
Süß.
Wow. Ja, süß.
That's a long ago memory. Das ist eine der allerersten Einspielungen von irgendwas. Sorry, that's one of the first recordings of anything I ever did 125 years ago with David Lutz, a wonderful colleague. At that time, we were quite around doing a lot of recitals. It was actually before I'd even met Wolfram. And it was before the 1995 Amsterdam project, which was supposed to be with Jeffrey Parsons, but he was very ill and actually died in January of that year. So it's a lot of if anybody is interested in the chronology, we can talk about it later. But never mind. But it's a fun piece. It obviously turned into something. It turns into Hans and Gretel, and then it turns into the scherzo. It's quite fun.
Well, so you're alluding to two things. It's used in a later song, Hans and Gretel. It's basically the same song, and that especially bum 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 bum. We recognize, as you say.
Yeah.
So we have some fundamental elements there in the first symphony. I want to talk fundamentally about that. First of all, that open fifth in the bass, the kind of a drone effect, and the of course, very folk-like approach to this whole story, the love story between Hans and Greta. The folk is clearly operative. We're not in Das Haben Wunderhorn yet officially. We probably are getting inspiration from that in some ways. But that's a very important line, isn't it, in Mahler's approach to texts and to the idiomatic sort of reference to that kind of music. What is Mahler doing there, and why?
Look, there's some wonderful literature we all know, and everybody who really wants to go down that rabbit hole, if you will, of all those connections of folk poetry and German romantic poetry, do that. It's very worthwhile. What remains for me are a couple of things. Is that one, Mahler loved the humor of children. He loved to watch kids and see them where they were going to go, both in a warning and a kind of wizened uncle looking at the Alm and watching the kids play. I think I think he had a far richer sense of humor and family and life, even as a young man, than we give him credit for. Maybe some of that is even nostalgic because it's a kind of family life that he was never allowed for many reasons, much less the death of so many of his siblings. That's one thing. There's always, it's very Schubertian in that even though it's a love song or a fun song, there's always this hint of minor and the minor key in the background. It's always coming and going and sort of, if you think about the great love songs of Schubert, even as the famous Ständchen, they're mostly in the minor key. And that Austrian blood is certainly where that DNA is certainly Mahler. The other thing I find very captivating, and I think it's parallel to the folk sources. I think Mahler, especially in the beginning of writing his songs, was very intent on capturing in a scenic way exactly what happened, both musically and literarily. I think his love of folk poetry was in some ways his detesting of pretentiousness and artifice and artificiality. Not that he thought poetry was artificial, but it had to be at the level of Goethe before it actually clicked into the essence of truth. If I may say something like that, is so general. But I think this scenic element, and it's this scenic element in all of his songs, especially the Chronology, right up to the beginning of the 20th century, that makes us all long for an opera. It makes us all wish we could see the development of a character through an evening or something like that. And we're going to hint on that. You spoke of Rubezoll. I remember reading, I can't give you the quote right away, but in fact, the Tirso de Molina, Don Giovanni, was a subject that interested him very much as a potential theatrical work. And so we have these rather harmless, in my opinion, but sweet glimpses of Mahler more than probably Tirso de Molina, because the figure of Don Giovanni is a little bit darker than and probably Mahler would have gotten that, but these two songs we have are rather gentle. They're sweet. They're very melodic and so forth. The other thing is that this melody. Now, part of the weeds you'll get into if you do go into this literature is Herder, Johann Herder, who really started the ball rolling for had his. It's very interesting to me. He was a theologian, but regardless, his passion for identifying a people was through their language. And that's the essence of Des Knaben Wunderhorn. It is the German language, the German tales, the German stories handed down in various ways through generations. It's like the cream that goes to the top of the milk. And I think that Mahler was also very caught up in an identity question, not only of himself, but of the country he lived in. The end of the 19th century was, we had a Germany, for the first time and only time, that it came up. But what is German?
Yeah.
And this was a big question at the end of the, flipping back to the Czech, Moravian, Austrian Empire question. So I see all of that brewing up. I know it's a longer answer than you probably anticipated, but it is the stuff that and I don't know why I've just immediately been attracted to these songs, and how Mahler, in a kind of forensic way, brings out these harmless characters, but nevertheless the stuff of life.
Yeah, exactly. The essence of lived experience, as you once described it, more or less. I think it's an example of what we were saying earlier, that these are microcosms of much greater issues in Mahler's life and his perspective. Then we moved to 5 songs that were published as well: Frühlingsmorgen and Erinnerung to texts by Richard Leander, going by the pen name of Richard von Volkmann. Then we have the Hans and Grete that we just heard as reworking of Maitanz. And then the 2 settings, as you just alluded to, of Tirso de Molina, a play called Don Juan, a very funny play, by the way. And there are 2 sections of that have a sort of the call for music in that play. And he sets both of those, interestingly, in the stage context. Let's listen to one of these. I want to listen to Erinnerung, because in a sense this takes us in a slightly different direction when it comes to Mahler's style. Let's listen to Erinnerung.
Es wecket meine Liebe, die Lieder immer wieder. Es wecken meine Lieder, die Liebe immer wieder. Die Lippen, die da träumen von deinen heißen Küssen, in Sang und Liedesweisen von dir sie tönen müssen. Und wollen die Gedanken der Liebe sich entschlagen, so kommen meine Lieder zu dir mit Liebesklagen. So halten mich in Banden die beiden immer wieder. Es weckt das Lied die Liebe weckt die Lieder.
Well, what a journey. You have talked about this song so many times as sort of an encapsulation of much of what Mahler wants to say about song itself.
Well, when I've done, I'm just reading a question. Okay, right. We'll get to that. Yes, I mean, when I really want to sort of take Mahler and have someone have an autobiographical experience through his, especially kind of Wunderhorn songs, but his songs in general, I usually start with this song, and I end with Liebste um Schönheit. They both seem to me two of the most incredibly personal statements by Gustav Mahler, even though the first one is, I mean, they're both chosen poetry. We know what the story behind Liebste um Schönheit was. I don't actually think he ever intended to publish it at all. And I, you know, the orchestration, as good as it is and might be, is not Mahler's. So that's kind of why I hesitate to sing it with orchestra. But never mind. But I just find I find also that the Erinnerung in these harmonies and the structure of the song and the you know, he may be an unknown poet, but you know, it's pretty damn good poetry. Thank you very much. That there's so much, even at this early stage, that we hear of the mature Mahler. You know, you can hear the Kindertotenlieder in here. You can hear to some extent Ullicht in here. You can hear, you know, so many different places where he's going, and yet this is a very, very early Mahler. I just find it very indicative. It's like Schubert songs, you know, when you know as well as I, you look at the songs of 1815, which are, you know, so young, and it's like, whoosh, this volcano's about to erupt, and it feels like that to me too. Plus, I just find it an extraordinarily beautiful song.
Yeah, and it's a very different one from My Tanz im Grünen, or the sort of folk-inspired direction that we're going to find. Actually, interestingly enough, after these 5 songs, he goes really exclusively into Wunderhorn. But before that, we're looking at 4 or 5 or 6 different authors of texts. He's doing what most composers do. They dip into this collection,
Yeah.
this collection, this play, and they put out songs inspired by, in a sense, what they present to the composer. That's going to change dramatically. We're not going to talk about that today, but there's that's a very important factor in terms of how Mahler shifts his approach to text right after this, and as we get into the 1890s, especially.
You know, you mentioned the early songs and that extraordinary Im Lenz, which I have that early. I obviously brought it down, and I did sing it in Amsterdam, and I've never sung it again in Winterlied. But you hear Das Klagende Lied,
Yes.
You know, without question. And you hear the if you will, even the Wagnerian line that he believes or wants to sort of capture. It's like he's studying himself. And after those early sort of really not terribly successful songs, if I may be so cruel, you know, it's like he pulls back and synthesizes in a dramatic way the essential need of harmony and melody to what the essential expression of the poetry is. And I think that brought him back to a consistency of source of poetry, that it kind of Wunderhorn. Now, Morten, you can help me. I've kind of forgotten this, and I've been reading a lot. A couple of really quite interesting new books have come out on Mahler and the fin de siècle and so forth. And there's still some discussion, it would seem to me, about when Mahler actually had Das Genaue Wunderhorn in his hands. Everything from as a kid to Anna von Mildenburg gave it to him, you know, or she loaned it to him. I know that specifically because I actually own those volumes. Sorry, folks, parenthetically, but that's what you get when you invite me here. You know, it's a wonderful story of my wife, but I'll save you all of that. A Christmas present I'll never forget. But the point is, I believe that actually I think already in Iglau, he had come across Kenamadwuno. I think it's part of his schooling. I think it's very early. I don't think it's to pick up a volume at a cafe in Vienna when he's a student. Oh, gee, this is a great source. I think it's been with him, but you can correct me.
I won't. That speculation will, I think, remain alive. I think it's not impossible that Mahler's knowledge of the collection also does extend to school. Now, I have actually been looking at some of the school books that were used at Mahler's time, and there's a Lesebuch. I think the editor's name is Mozart, of all names. He put out a collection of texts for these kids to read, and I would have to take another look at it. I remember I was looking for Eichendorff and other sources because he's in touch with so many different authors so early. I was suspecting that the school was probably one of those sources. But let's not forget his father was an avid reader as well and was very proud of his collection at home.
Exactly. Bernard doesn't get credit for that. We always talk about as a tavern owner who beat his children.
Yeah.
But there's another aspect to it. And interesting you mentioned Eichendorff, because Eichendorff had an enormous, I'm a little surprised it didn't set a
Yeah.
Eichendorff poem, because
Yeah.
he loved Eichendorff, and he loved the Poesie Literatur, the Musikpoesie, and he spoke of it not often, but certainly demonstrably. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think at the very latest we can suspect that he knew about this from the Weber household when he was in Leipzig, and of course with Marion von Weber and then their library, that was certainly accessible to him as well. So even if it's the dates are still a little iffy, there are many points of possible contact, and inevitably some of those must have connected with him. Absolutely.
And I apologize if any of the authors, or if this is seen by them, I apologize, because I know there are some authors who have taken great pains to actually drill that down. And I've just read so many things right now, that particular point is sort of still floating in my mind. I can't really just offer as a boom, but just what you mentioned. But even by the time he's in Leipzig with Marion von Weber, he's already written some early songs.
Right.
So we'll have to see.
Yeah. I think we should also, before we move on, and one of the things that actually is important to the next set that we'll talk about is Mahler as an author as well. I mean, we talked about the Rübezahl,
Yes.
the libretto he wrote. We talked about Das Klagende Lied, which of course we've only mentioned in passing. It's not a song, but it's certainly an incredible achievement for a 20-year-old. He's finishing this in 1880. Echoes of this, as you say, are also to be heard in the early songs. So Mahler as a literary talent, and someone I think looking very much to the model of Wagner, and this is something we need to consider. Some of these early songs, by the way, authorship of text is still up in the air, but the next set we
True.
know all by Mahler, and it's Lieder eines fahrenden Gesellen. Before we go on, though, I want to just remind everybody, please send in questions through the chat. We are live, and we're happy to answer your questions. At the very least, at the end of the hour, we'll try not to get too distracted. We're trying to get through some things here, but please don't worry. We're going to try to get your questions at the very end, and don't hesitate. Now's your chance to ask. All right, let's get to Lieder eines fahrenden Gesellen. These are, of course, the result of, as in some cases in Mahler, of a love affair gone awry. Mahler is the poet, the author. What more can we say about the background to these songs?
Well, look, everybody knows the story of delicious Johanna Richter, who didn't, give in to all the wiles of the young, charming Gustav Mahler. Whatever that heartbroken experience was, I have to push back a little bit to all of you and say, yes, I think the relationship was important. Yes, I think that it played a part in him identifying poetry that might express that. But to actually say because of that relationship, here came the cycle, I'm a little hesitant on that. I think there's just too much influence from Schubert, and certainly the Winterreise, certainly in one of my passions of German literature, especially German Romanticism, is this clash of nature and fate. And I think that there were plenty of reasons and expressions brewing in young Gustav that this cycle would have happened with or without that relationship. And because he was a young man in the bloom of his life, and obviously was going to have that relationship. So I'm not denying it. It's just I think that the cycle itself has so much DNA of the 19th century and German Romanticism that it would have been inevitable from Mahler. I think that there is a great parallel in the anger of the loss of naivety or adolescence, very similar to Winterreise. One can talk for a great long time what happens at the tree. Does he, is it Schöne Müllerin or is it Winterreise? I personally don't. We'll get there. But fahrende Gesellen, I have to tell you anecdotally, I was raised in Spokane, Washington, and Spokane, Washington was the home of the Hans Mordenauer archive for many, many years. I came into music very late and I didn't know anything, but I had this incredible music director in Spokane, Washington, Donald Tulin, who's since left us for the Heavenly Choir. Um, and it was, and also my voice teacher, who had been a student of Lotte Lehmann and was completely besotted with German literature and German repertoire. And so I was singing this, but every once in a while we'd have to do these Webern concerts because Hans Moldenhauer was Mr. Webern, you know. And it was, for me, some of the strangest music I'd ever looked at in my life. I just didn't know this kind of music and so forth. And you know, I learned it, you know, kind of pounded note for note into my stupid head. But now I find it arch romantic and beautiful. But nevertheless, so one day Donald Tulin calls me up and he said, "Oh, I've got a surprise for you. We're going down to the archives of the Moldenhauer archive." And I said, "Oh, great. What's a Moldenhauer archive?" So we go down to the very basement of the old National Bank building, and Hans Moldenhauer at that time could still see, but carefully, and his lovely, wonderful musicologist wife, Maureen, was still with us. And the two of them were there to sort of share with Dawn, and Dawn decided to share with me this experience of looking at the manuscripts of their collection. And I remember distinctly the things that were being shown to me, and I'm saying with some embarrassment and candidness that I had no clue what I was actually looking at. But I remember it settled with me, you know, a manuscript of Schubert's song, handwritten on a Goethe poem called Am See. You know, I had that in my hands. But I also had in my hands the manuscript of all 6 poems that Moldenhauer have. They're in the Moldenhauer archive. I believe they're now in Munich. I think they went to the Munich library in that convolute that he planted there. So that was kind of, I remember that experience. And I remember something else that he showed me of Mahler, or showed us of Mahler, but I don't remember, and some other things and so forth. But I remember the conversation between Hans and Dawn about the fact that the fahrenden Gesellen had intended to be 6 and became 4, and here's the other poems. I couldn't read them in German. I couldn't, you know, I saw the handwriting, as it were, and so forth. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that. It's rather exciting moments in my life.
It's a wonderful story, and it points out again something that may be overlooked, that these were not 4 poems set and made into a cycle. They were in fact a long set of poems from which he extracted these 4. Frankly, the other 2 poems would not work in a song cycle. They're much more philosophical and far roaming than that. But the idea of the journeyman, which is what a Gesellen really is, and this wandering soul and the restlessness and the search, all of that really encapsulates what he's trying to do with these poems. And I completely agree. If it wasn't Johanna Richter, it would be somebody else. I mean, this was all brewing inside of him, and it was something that needed to come out. And importantly, these are poems that Mahler wrote and that were converted into song, which is a slightly different project than saying I'm going to write a libretto for myself, or I'm going to write a song based on this. It might have been rather simultaneous, but also perhaps not, which I think is an intriguing thought.
You know, what you just said are the 2 points, are just the 2 poles for me, and thank you for saying that. One is this apprenticeship, this journeyman, this guy, you know, a journeyman, a Gesellen at that time would have been pretty much a Tischler, a carpenter of some sorts, who did his apprentice yards for someone else, had to be years with someone else, went to work with a master, could very well have lived a peripatetic life, but nevertheless was accumulating life's experience to become a master. Okay, we get that from unions and all that sort of stuff. But the other side of this coin, exactly what you said, is this ewige Wanderer, this eternal wandering, the wanderlust, which is, of course, DNA to the early Romantic period like ever, and defining, or the ability to define, and this is, I think, a big point of early German literature, was also the right to explore psychologically or even physically, humanly, you know, Wohnsitz, if you will, what had not been possible in the 18th century. And this birth of the individual at the beginning of the 20th century, regardless of Metternich's thumb on everybody's life, and this bursting out, we've got 1848 behind us, we're in a new country, we've got a lot of liberal ideas in Vienna, but there's this continual search in the literature for the soul that cannot land, and the soul that cannot come to grips with becoming an adult. recognizing the evil of the world and remaining true to their true soul. And this conflict is, I think, inherent in the fahrenden Gesellen, and it's, you know, it's a baggage you take on stage with you, and don't point your finger at people. Don't preach.
That's right. We're getting a graphic here, I think. That
Oh, how fun. I'm getting somebody's.
that looks like a desktop. Anyway, I wanted to we could get so far into this topic. It's a fascinating one, of course, about Mahler's psyche and the whole time. But let's move on to just talk a little bit about fahrenden Gesellen. What's the story about? Let's just set the stage a little bit about what this is. And there are two other journeymen, two other journeys that you just alluded to, haunting this in some very important ways. And those are the two big cycles by Schubert. Die schöne Müllerin and Winterreise, the idea of moving ahead. The Schöne Müllerin is about a journeyman, and he's trying to learn his craft, and he falls in love. There's a tragic ending, and Winterreise is literally a journey. And I think both of these are in the back of Mahler's mind. Some of it much more in the forefront of his mind when he sets to setting these four songs.
Well, I think that, I mean, the story is well known. If you're writing a plot analysis of this, the first song is the shock, the given situation. The second song is denial.
That's right.
The third song is anger. And the fourth song is release, is grief, is to some extent resolution, you know. Yeah. But these are, if you were going to tell this story and say, okay, I want to write this plot, I think that's what we land on. This young gentleman is recognizing the betrothal of the girl he loves, and it's not to him. And you know, wenn mein Schatz Hochzeit macht, fröhliche Hochzeit macht, habe ich meinen traurigen Tag. It's a little bit different than the Spielmann and Schumann, and that the poor bastard is playing the violin for the girl that's dancing around at her wedding, and he thought he was going to be the guy. There's a little bit of a conjunctive in the first song. There's a inevitability of the wedding, but there's almost as a pre-reckoning of what could be coming at him, right? And he's working through that.
Okay, let's listen to the opening here, because this is an incredibly complex psychological moment. The protagonist has just arrived at a wedding, and we think this is a joyous occasion. Turns out she's not marrying him. And so this incredible layering, which is a hallmark of Mahler's genius, is something he captures here with just incredible accuracy. So let's listen to just the first page or so of the first song, Wenn mein Schatz, from Lieder eines fahrenden Gesellen. So here we have the band. So what I find so ingenious about this is the difference in time frame. I mean, we hear the band at the beginning, and then we have Mahler coming in, the protagonist coming in half time, as if the trauma has slowed down reality to the extent that he has to take all of this in. He uses the same melody and talks about going to a happy wedding. And then in the background, the instruments pay no heed to his tempo. As soon as we hear the band again, it's ba-da-da-da-pa-bum, and this unfathomable distinction between my reality, and outside reality. The trauma of that is just sheer genius.
Well, I think it sets us up. It sets up to three things. One, my friends and colleagues. It is torture to sit here and listen to myself, much less watch myself. But I'm doing it for you. I'm falling on my sword. I'm gonna go get incredibly drunk later. No, I don't do that. Anyway, never mind. One, it also would be very interesting for me. I didn't talk about it because I haven't listened to this recording in, I don't know how long, if I ever did listen to it. To hear my own, and there's a question coming up on that, my own genesis of this cycle and the different people I worked with and so on. But never mind. What you're absolutely right about, that has always been my goal, and I'll tell you a funny story about that. Is that this consciousness of the party is inevitable, objective, and cruel, and this deeply emotional, oh ve, me, poor me. At this tempo, the way I just sang it at this youth, for me, it's incredibly self-indulgent and extremely self-pitying. Not of me, but of the person. But I'll tell you, when I starting with, you guys will love this. I'm one of the last living singers that's worked with Leonard Bernstein, and I'm very proud of, and I loved working. And we did this cycle together, and we had already done the Kindertotenlieder. So I got this call. I'm in New York, and he said, "Oh yes, Lenny wants to have a rehearsal before he sees you in Vienna. He's in Connecticut. The car's coming for you at 7 a.m. He will see you at your house and so forth." So here I am, Sunday morning, in a car going up to Connecticut to work with Leonard Bernstein. I get there, of course he's not up, he's not whatever. So I have my cup of coffee and I wave. Finally, here comes Lenny in sort of a nightshirt, whatever, with a cup of coffee, clearly a very late night with whatever was involved. And good, we're gonna get at this. Let me go, Mahler, that'll wake me up, right? So me, being the unctuous, over-caffeinated young man and studied my stuff, was just ready. I said, "Oh, Lenny, wow, we're going to have such a thing with this cycle. I mean, God, look at the first page. I mean, it's like this, is that triplet over a triplet, or is it triplet over two? Is it in 3/8? I mean," and then he writes the first phrase is in on a 63 to a quarter note, and then there's a bar line with the fermata. I mean, my God, and then and it's 60. I mean, can one really hear the difference? 63, and Lenny is like looking at me like the alien has come out of his library, and it's like, whoa, wait a minute, yeah. So, good God, have you ever been to a Jewish wedding? What? And no, why? He said, "Oh, diddle deedle die, die die, diddle deedle die, die die." And you know what? He's not happy. Now sing the goddamn thing, I mean, as long as I live, I'll never forget that. It was just fantastic. And then we worked through the whole cycle, and I was up there for, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours. I worked on this with Schwarzkopf as well. It was very, very, I worked with a lot of people on this, but those two, Schwarzkopf's get short shrift for Mahler and certain types of music. And I learned so much about the carrying of line and exactly what you're talking about, this context, the personal context in an external context that are completely contradictory, which I think is Schubertian at the absolute essence of it, in my opinion. So anyway, where are we now? Going to the section. Now, what I wanted to, because we're going to run out of time, what is, in my opinion, for fahrenden Gesellen elemental, and that is that the delusional desire to identify with nature is a relief from the human cruelty. If only he could become Pan, if only he could talk to the birds, if only the sunshine was there, then this awful stuff called human wouldn't happen.
Right. That's his refuge. In fact, that's the incredible move, I think, psychologically, in the next song, and that is what you were saying, denial. But think about the psychological insight he must have had, the trauma followed by denial. And the opening is like, hey, nothing ever really happened. This is just great. Isn't it great? Yeah. Isn't it? And that sort of manic aspect is what comes out, of course, in this second song. Let's listen to the beginning of that. Ging heut Morgen.
Ging heut Morgen übers Feld, da noch auf den Gräsern hing, sprach zu mir der lustge Fink, ei du Geld. Oh, nicht eine schöne Welt, schöne Welt. Zink, zink, schön und flink, wie mir doch die Welt gefällt.
So here he is, he's celebrating. It's just a wonderful thing. And as you said, his discussion is now with nature because the whole human side is too complicated and the birds are going to pick him up and he's going to be everything's just going to be fine again. Of course, we know that this manic swing doesn't work. By the end of the song, he's back into his depression. But
well,
it's
again,
a strange song.
I love this. I love this trajectory of nature and fate. You know, and the ends of fate would be naivety to destiny, and nature would be sublimity to perversion. And somewhere in each of these, in anywhere along though, is this how intense is this conflict? And this intense conflict is, in my opinion, in pretty much all German literature and German Romantic literature, and it certainly was in Herder's mind in collecting these poems or encouraging that we look at this source of German expression to work out the problems of the German culture. And this is a through line of Germanistic, as you well know, through especially the 19th century. And this would have been very much part of Mahler's entry into this world and his continual and utter preoccupation. What we see with going into the Rückert, which we'll get into another time, is a bit of a transcendence out of this world into a refuge of metaphysical reality. The divine is within you kind of expression. But we'll save that for another session.
Right. But to add to that, the refuge in nature also becomes complicated in Mahler. This is where he's very modern. It's a kind of a post-Darwinian awareness that even nature is not the haven we thought it was. And this is where the romantics, that whole notion has to be completely reevaluated as we get into later Mahler. But we'll get there. Let's listen to another fascinating use of this theme. Do we have this ready, Marco? I hope we do. Yeah.
Oh, good. Super.
Let's listen to this very same theme become the main theme of the First Symphony after that mystical opening and the bird song and so on. This is, of course, the theme that becomes that carries the whole first movement of the First Symphony. So, it sounds so bucolic and idyllic and wonderful, but if you don't know the song cycle, I think you're probably right in making that assumption. But knowing where this very song goes, never mind the cycle, isn't it a bit of an odd, almost a doubtful optimism here?
A doubtful optimism. Is that an oxymoron? That's a lovely phrase.
Yes.
I think that are we, with Mahler, even the most personal aspects, and even when we use the word love, doesn't seem to me a personal love, but a sense of understanding the world in which we live and arriving at perhaps a higher discourse of compassion. We've talked about at length. So these releasing moments and these so-called finality moments I think are almost rhetorical more than inevitable, and that is different than Schubert. Schubert pretty much tells you where you're going with this. Although again, back to Winterreise, I may have an odd take on that, but I don't think, I think as much as it's about the death, it's the death of adolescence and idealism, and that the Leiermann is the voice within you. You must find your song and go, is that what this is all about? I mean, the entire cycle in one sentence at the end of 90 minutes of torture, soll ich mit dir gehen? Should I go with you? Are you going to play my songs? And I think that metaphorical, rhetorical question it just rides through the 19th century. I think Mahler was deeply embraced in that. This is a youthful piece that has eternal echoes inside of it. It would seem to me. I know we have a couple of questions, and I can see from the blurb that people are really participating in their feelings about what these songs mean, and maybe want to share those.
I'd like to. I know we're at the hour, and we're going to try to cut this short somehow. I do somehow want to do our duty to at least give a snippet of each of the songs in the cycle.
Oh, good.
We might have to cut it there. We have more material for you, but we only have that hour. So let's listen to the beginning of the third song, which is, of course, this cry of despair now that he's come to terms with it. And he's talking about a knife.
And by the way, before you start that, in the third song, we probably won't get that far, but it's amazing to me in the bit where he sees her, he imagines seeing her and her objective beauty and so forth. And in the background, we have Titan's theme. This hero's journey that is going on. This is endemic to the entire fahrenden Gesellen, a hero's journey, mythic proportions. Too fast.
Ich hab ein glühend ein Messer in meiner Brust. Oh weh, das schneit so tief. In jede Freude und jede Lust. So tief, es schneit so weh und tief. Ach, was ist das für ein böser Gast? Ach, was ist das für ein böser Gast? Nimmer hält Ruhe, nimmer hält Rast. Nicht bei Tag, noch bei Nacht, wenn ich schlief. Oh weh, oh weh.
That Ove, of course, is also something we hear in Das klagende Lied. That's interesting carryover there too. So he has this glowing knife in his chest. Of course, can be seen as metaphorical. Could be seen as a suicide.
I don't see that. I think the Messer has been. She has, in her cruelty, has stuck this messer in his heart. She's broken my heart, is how I've always felt that. Ich habe ein Messer in meinem Heart. This pain in my heart is like a knife in my heart, because my life has been taken from me how I wanted it to be and so forth. I don't think it's Werther. Although that's another conversation. Mahler's Titan and Werther, but we'll leave that to the side. Never mind. I don't think this. I don't. Maybe someone else does. I don't see that.
All right, let's go to the last song, and this is set as a funeral march at the very beginning, and it ends in a very, very peculiar and almost lyrical fashion. Let's listen to the last.
Geschickt.
geblickt. Nun hab ich ewig Leid und Gräme.
Definitely a funeral march. And he's bemoaning having seen those two blue eyes, which sent him off. By the way, very, very particular image, and one that also shows up in Die schöne Müllerin. The wayfarer, the journeyman in that set also talks about the blue eyes.
Yes.
All right. I don't know. We have more to talk about. We have a connection here between this and the funeral march of the first symphony. It comes back in the first symphony again. This the very end of this movement, not the beginning here, but the very end of the movement comes back. The song comes back in the middle of the middle section of the funeral march of the first symphony as well. And there's an incredible allusion to Winterreise. Maybe we should go to questions, and I don't know, this is kind of a unique opportunity to get into some of this material. If our audience wants to hang on for a few more minutes, I think it would be useful to get through the audio examples.
By the way, I think if I make it, because I agree, we should move on, and everybody's welcome to stay. But what you just mentioned, the Winterreise, I think the cornerstone of that connection is, of course, the Lindenbaum, and the Lindenbaum to which he sings, both, like the Lindenbaum of Winterreise and in the fourth song of the fahrenden Gesellen. I think we have to see the Lindenbaum certainly scenically as this tree that he leans against, and so forth. But the tree, the Lindenbaum, in and of itself, is a metaphor of collective memory, and it is the go-to place to feel better about where you've had to go. But it's sort of like es war einmal, at one time it was better. So the use of the Lindenbaum in the 19th century, but also what has just become as a symbol of this collective memory, that his lying down under the Lindenbaum is a completely different function than in the Winterreise. In the Winterreise, it's like he leans against this tree and he realizes that it's the Lindenbaum, and it's this moment in the propulsion, the anger and the propulsion of the first 5 songs of the Winterreise stops him at this tree in a memory of, and this memory is not realizable. And that's when he looks at the ice, that is water still going under it, and then we get all these other. In this place, it's like the Gesellen, the young wayfarer, chooses to sit under a Lindenbaum, hug this tree, in the hope that maybe it's just a nightmare. maybe it's. I think there's something. There's, in the same way that we have this presage of melancholy in the beginning, or even, as you say, the doubtful optimism. At this point, it would seem to me to be the optimism of the doubt. Right. I don't see it as death. Even though I don't think he lets his last breath go, but I think when he gets up, he's a completely different human being.
Well, let's have our audience experiences, because we were alluding to so many things here, and we have it all prepared, so we might as well present it. Let's listen to the last section of this final song of Lieder eines fahrenden Gesellen, just the beginning of it, and you'll hear. Then we'll go to just a brief snippet from the first symphony where we see he's taking it up again in the symphonic means. So this is the end of the fourth and last song, just the beginning of the ending, so to speak.
Zu mich nicht wie das Leben tut, war alles, alles wieder gut. Ach, alles wieder
It's hard not to hear that return to the funeral march as something extremely foreboding. That this is the world and dream that he's talking about isn't quite as optimistic as you say. It's the reversal of what we were talking about earlier about this hoping almost against hope. Let's listen to now, and this is clearly music that was significant to Mahler. Mahler didn't have any shortage of musical ideas in his mind, but he does put this into his first symphony. Let's listen. This is the middle section of the funeral march, characteristically, of the first symphony. And it goes on as a literal quotation of what we just heard. And it too ends with that march, that funeral march gesture, to which it returns, with which it returns to the beginning of the movement, now in a different key. So the funeral march is really, this is sort of the moment of hope, perhaps, in the middle of the very sarcastic funeral march, completely nostalgic and sentimental, nothing like the irony we've heard around it. But then it goes back to that funeral march gesture, just as it does in the song. Maybe we should take a look at the words to the Mahler here, and then look at the Schubert in more detail. This is what we just heard in the last segment of the song. And there are a couple of very interesting moves here from the literary perspective. Again, this is Mahler writing the words. He talks about the Lindenbaum, and he talks about the blossoms snowing down upon him. If ever there was an allusion to the winter's journey, it would be the snowing blossoms. And the idea here of a certain timelessness and a shift in time, how everything was good again in the past tense, of course, in an impossible moment in time, and shows again the depth of his disillusionment and disorientation at the very end, as he's describing his memories, his reflections, his regrets, whatever we want to call that. All right, now we're gonna compare this to the Lindenbaum, just the last three stanzas of the Schubert song, And this is the Lindenbaum. This is the famous song. It would have been absolutely impossible for Mahler to quote the whole notion of a Lindenbaum without thinking of Schubert, and especially the traveling journeyman. This is a Schubert now with the text.
Und seine Zeige rauschten, als riefen sie mir zu. Komm her zu mir, Geselle, hier findest du deine Ruhe. Kalten Winde bliesen mir grad ins Angesicht, der Hut flog mir vom Kopfe, ich wendete mich nicht. Manche Stunde entfernt von jenem Ort, und immer hör ich's rauschen, du fändest Ruhe dort. Nun bin ich manche Stunde entfernt von jenem Ort, und immer hör ich's rauschen, du fändest Ruhe dort, du fändest Ruhe
We left the ending off in the interest of time, but here we have not only Schubert creating this very same scene, but the Lindenbaum speaking to the Geselle. He's actually referring to the journeyman in the text, in Wilhelm Müller's text. And he says, come, rest under my boughs. It totally freaks out the traveler in Winterreise. And he says, I didn't even pick up my hat. I didn't even turn around. I just kept going. To me, this seems very, very purposeful on the part of Mahler, that he is going to go to that place that the wanderer that the journeyman in the Schubert collection doesn't go back to, and that maybe the peace that was going to be found under his boughs, which clearly in Schubert's case was an allusion to death, wasn't such a bad prospect. Just putting that out there.
No, I like that. It's similar to how I was trying to say it as well, and that in that I guess the word I'm using is rhetorical, that I don't think that it's not like the description of death where the boy in the Schöne Müllerin, lies down in the water, and that's that there's and that's this collective memory, that there's a refuge in our memories. I just lost my mother, and God rest her and keep her, and we've all lost our relatives, but and I don't mean to be just a glancing blow at that, but the overwhelming richness of my memories of my life and with my mother and about my mother and for my mother are what I will take to my death. And I just think there's an overwhelming compassion to the notion of Lindenbaum in German literature, and some of it is that. Again, to me, the great literature encourages us to find in ourselves the experience and the answer, rather than, I found the book that told me how to live. It's like the Lost Gospel of Thomas, or there's so much literature that is inviting us to simply say, wake up, take your life in your own hands and live it.
Yeah.
And be nice to other people because they're doing the same. Anyway.
That's as far as we're going to get today, because we're way over time and we had more material for you. we were going to talk about an incredibly interesting manuscript. We'll have to leave that for another time, I think. But so many dimensions to this and so many questions. So I think we need to turn to our audience here. And some of these questions you can see as well, Thomas. Anthony
Yes, I do
Rahman,
see them.
Anthony Rahman writes, Thomas, how has your interpretation of Mahler's Lieder changed as your career has progressed? Do you still feel the zest and anxiety of the young Mahler, or more mellow and darker insight with your own journey into Mahler's psychology and life?
Yes. Wonderful question, Anthony. Without question, as you get older, when I sing fahrenden Gesellen, I still do sing it and love it. It's not gotten any easier. I deeply love it. I'm very passionate. But there's no question that as you get older and farther away from these young men that you may have inhabited at your early life, that not that you're describing, but that you're participating in a memory of that part of your life. And what I mean by that is I don't think it's ill-conceived, and not just to me, but of anybody, of a maturity to sing a young person's lieder, but there's a different reflection to it. Have I, through my career, become more intensely preoccupied, if you will, with the inner dimensions of Mahler, and especially songs that carry what I think are contradictory or enlightening paradoxes? Without question. This side of Mahler's personality and life I cherish very deeply.
I have another question. I have two questions, actually. One from Bet van der Waal van Dijk, who writes, hi, Thomas. Why do you think Das Klagende Lied is not performed very often? Isn't it interesting, being from 1880? And another one from Nick Fisher. What are your thoughts on Das Klagende Lied? It seems to be a rather forgotten work and rarely performed. Such a fantastic piece.
Well, you would be better suited to address that, or anybody else. Klagende Lied is not something I would love to do the speaking part or whatever it is, but I haven't ever performed it. I think any pieces of Mahler that are not frequently performed, it's a loss for our audience. I think Klagende Lied is a fantastic story. So I agree with you guys to ask that question. Can't answer the first one and can only encourage the second one. I don't know why it's not performed. Maybe it's difficult to cast. Is it difficult to cast, Morten?
Yes, there are two boy sopranos, there are soloists, there are the choral parts, there's an offstage band. There's a lot of organization around this piece.
Right.
And it's a costly, complicated affair. Yeah. I can see the practical reasons, not musically, because it's an incredible musical piece in terms of.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's against it. I think you're right. I think it's like, I mean, if somebody's going to gather those resources, they're probably going to be looking at Mahler 8, and maybe they don't. Maybe I don't know, but Klagende Lied is certainly a neglected cousin, without question.
Yeah. And another question from Anthony Raumann is Mahler's association with this Klammern Wunderhorn a self-reference to Mahler's superimposing his cultural background as the wandering Jew within the Austrian-Hungarian Empire and his position as an apprentice at this stage of development of his career?
Well, I think that's a very observant question, and I think your answer is already inside of that. You've identified DNA as well as context. I don't think he's when I see a word like superimposing, I don't think the intention. Not sure I would agree with it that it's an intentional attempt to articulate that, but that it comes from that place. Apropos his very famous quote about his identity, that it is encased in a kind of identity. That would make sense to me. Morten, how would you feel?
Yeah, I think I agree what you're saying, that it's not necessarily intentional in the sense that I'm self-aware in this sort of postmodern way. I don't think that that's what's happening, but certainly the identity is dwelling within him, and his need to explore this. It comes out in so many forms, actually. It's not just in these songs, but there's an incredible letter about this that we could get into at some point as well. I have a João Felipe Gremski from Brazil writes, how do you interpret Kindertotenlieder? Now, I have to tell our audience, you just have to come back for the third or fourth installment when we do Kindertotenlieder. We'll be doing. I should explain how this is working. The second and third installments will probably be Das Klammern Wunderhorn. The fourth installment will be the Rückert songs, Kindertotenlieder, and the other Rückert songs. And then our last installment will be Das Lied von der Erde. I think
And
that's
I
the only.
encourage you to join us on those sessions, but especially thank you for the question on Kindertotenlieder. I don't dare start to answer your question because we'll be, I got to go too. But as we say in the modern vernacular, I am very much looking forward to unpacking the Kindertotenlieder in my very personal view of where this was coming from and what Mahler was up to. And so that's very good. I love Francisco's question. Do you think Mahler's attraction to Tirso di Molina poem had something to do with his appreciation of Mozart and Don Giovanni? Without question, in my mind. I think he was besotted with Mozart. Don Giovanni was one of the most important pieces in his career that he conducted, his debut at the Metropolitan Opera. I think the character and eternal questions of Don Giovanni preoccupied him his whole life. And I think in the Tirso di Molina, he perhaps found a little bit more like Morten mentioned. It's more of a comedy, but a sardonic in that sense,
Yes.
sarcastic. And I think the sarcasm is the songs we have that he wrote. Yeah, the serenade. Ist ein schöner liebes Mai, da da dee, da 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 da. The rhetoric in the music is far stronger than actually the text that's gone. So I think you're onto something there, without question.
Yeah. That the Tirso de Molina is again his take on the Don Juan story, and it is of a very different ilk than the Mozart, but certainly the idea of this character and the potential he has. Those two pieces are suggested by the play itself. Those are moments where it's sung, like in Egmont, Clairchen's Lied, for instance. Those are examples of really poetry meant to be sung during the performance of the play, certainly is a possibility. So that's what Mahler is grappling with there. I have let's see. Wow, the questions are multiplying. Here we go. I have Donato Cabrera is writing. Hi, Tom. I was MTT, Michael Tilson Thomas's assistant, when you were performing with him for the Keeping Score series. Can you perhaps discuss MTT's wonderful idea about how the geography, both literally and metaphorically, shaped these early songs and symphonies of Mahler's childhood home? Remember, he talks about this goulash of sound coming from the barracks and from the church and from the Jewish synagogue, all these things sort of converging on the town square.
Well, I think you've just described it. I think that, and also the question implies the answer. I think Michael was absolutely, totally correct in the Keeping Score to actually physically go to Iglau and Kalište, and let us see the streets where the regiments were going through. He also had a colleague go to and I participated a little bit in this thought process. Where do these tunes come from? That some of the marches that Mahler had, and in fact. He found a Donizetti march, completely unknown, that the marching bands would have been playing as they were marching through Iglau, and it sounds dangerously suspicious to Nicht Wiedersehen and a few other, look, everything has, in my opinion, glancing and tangential connection, and genius is very much, in my opinion, the explosion of innovation more than singular bolts of lightning. And I think Mahler felt that way about the bolt of lightning for Mahler was how he could synthesize so many different things. But I think that you're very much onto something. I very often describe symphonies, especially to people who say, I don't like Mahler's music. And I said, I get that. I really do get that, because it's like sitting at a dinner table in a foreign country and everybody's having a rousing good time and stories are being told. You don't speak the language, but you can pick up on the emotion. And after a while, it's just boring. And a little bit irritating, and that can happen in Mahler as well. You're being carried along in something which is clearly transcendental, and here comes this damn Jewish song or some barrack nonsense or some drinking thing. I get it. It's and the context is important. So I think the geographical stereophonic experience that Michael was after, that is condensed into the personal experience in any concert hall, I think was a brilliant move, and exactly what a program like Keeping Score was all about. And by the way, if you don't know what we're talking about, Keeping Score is now available on Apple iTunes and Apple Store. It's a series of composers that Michael Tilson Thomas, in only his inimitable genius way, has this very personal relationship and conversation and performances that you participate in online, and you can own them or watch them in streaming, however you'd like to. They're really extraordinary. Start with Mahler, then go to Ives, then go back to Beethoven, and then pick up Berlioz where you want, and don't forget Tchaikovsky, and oh yeah, Stravinsky, you know.
Anthony Rodman has another question. Ging heute Morgen übers Feld. I think the final drum roll it signifies the oncoming rain and the return to reality. The illusion is dispersed. How does this equate to the leader of Schubert or Schumann? Any parallels?
Well, I think that's a wonderful question. What the minute you say signifies, it kind of says that's what it is. I would agree with you that there's an element to that. I think that the drum roll at the end of the song, the boy has already said, "Mir nimmer wird mein es blühen kann." And that's just, a lot of people land on the word blühen but the agogic of the sentence must go to the verb, which is kann. It is impossible for my love or my heart to bloom again. So this presage of the drum roll, I think, is very much, as you say, whether if you were making the music and you're hearing a drum roll and the rain's coming because the next song, go for it. This is the kind of stuff we carry in our imagination. I love it. I don't think we can actually definitely say that that's what it is. How is this related to Schubert and Schumann? It is the DNA of German lieder in the 19th century. The extra musical elements that invite one into the intensely personal psychology of what's happening in the song. This is, to me, the magic of German lieder and why I'm so passionate about it.
Well, I think that's a great way to end the show today. Even though we had to cut it short, we made it in an hour and a half.
It's not so short.
I have to do my outro. I want to thank you, Thomas, for being our guest today. We will continue with our series. We'll start up with Das Kamen Wunderhorn the next time around.
We don't know when, so don't write a bunch of emails. Actually, we're not announcing the date because we don't know when. It's going to be a while. I've got a crazy 6 weeks. I think we'll probably pick up the thread in May.
Next season. It'll be next season, probably even after summer. We have the summer season coming too. So look for us this fall to continue the series. I think is the most realistic way to think about it. Maybe July. We'll see. The Mahler Hour, brought to you by Mahler Foundation and contributors around the world, is a monthly streaming event bringing together individuals interested in the composer, the thinker, the humanist, Gustav Mahler, as we explore not only his life and works, but also how this legacy still informs the essential aspects of the human experience and how we can turn that experience into a force for the good in today's world. Become a member and support our activities. I want to thank my co-host today, Thomas Hampson, for joining us, as well as our production team, Francisco Bricio, Marco Ayala, and Monica Angiano, for our executive director for administration. The Mahler Hour is back on April 20th for a show dedicated to the intriguing and sometimes contradictory relationship between Mahler and Anton Bruckner. I will be joined by musicologist Ben Korstvedt as we explore their biographies and music in what is essentially a preview of the programming at this year's Mahler Festival in Steinbach am Attersee, taking place in late May. That's Mahler and Bruckner on next month's Mahler Hour. I hope you can join us. That's our program for today. Stay safe. Thanks for watching.
Bye, everybody. All the best.